we have a panel which travels around the world with Unbound. And it's super exciting to see the updates each year as we cover this subject in different markets. To discuss building an ecosystem for innovation, I'd like to welcome to the stage Moderator, Frank Meehan, co-founder and general partner of SparksLabs, and his panel of influencers. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for staying and thank you for being here. We have an absolutely amazing panel. Through first, Dirk, Lily, Russell, and Serena.
Hello.
Hi.
And Namal. I was wondering where he was. There he is. Very good. Okay. Well, thank you very much again for being here. And this, for me, is frankly the panel I think it's the most important panel for anything, because building an ecosystem is everything that it's about. So without any ado, we have Lily Tan, who I'm sure many of you know. But Lily, I just want to Lily has been instrumental in Unbound, co-founder of Unbound, I would say, in many ways.
I retired.
No, she's not. And has been, if you've ever been here with Unbound, Lily has been here for many years.
Thank you.
Dirk is joining us from Abu Dhabi. Dirk is in the Ministry of Health. And Dirk is driving Abu Dhabi's health tech ecosystem in lots of ways. Russell from SD Engineering, who I'm sure many of you know, one of the very big corporates here, and we're going to be talking about corporates and their role in ecosystems as well. Namal, Member of Parliament from Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka, I have engineers in Sri Lanka. I don't know if you know, but Sri Lanka has some fantastic developers. So it's all about driving Sri Lanka as a wonderful ecosystem, and you really should look at that from a technical viewpoint. And then Serena from Malaysia, previous JP Morgan, which she describes as Game of Thrones, which as absolutely the finance world, from the finance world of Game of Thrones to creating Game of Thrones. So and Serena's going to be focusing very heavily on Malaysia as a creative hub for creative industries. So we're going to get started. So the very first thing, Lily, tell us about what do you think an ecosystem? What is a successful ecosystem for you? What makes it?
It should be sustainable. Sustainable means people who have benefited from the ecosystem comes back and recontribute as investors, mentors, being part of the ecosystem. And I think in Singapore, when we started out, 10 years ago or more than 10 years ago, we were always concerned, would it be sustainable? Does the government have to input, a lot more investments in there? And many of you who are here would know the story of Block 71, and today, that is only one block, and there are many, many blocks inside there. An ecosystem should have universities around it. They do not need to be right in there, but the universities need to be part of the contribution, or rather institutions of higher learning. So it could be polytechnics, it could be universities, and the involvement of all parties. It's not just one. Government, corporations, industries, VCs, accelerators, institutions of higher learning, and people with money, and the startups, of course, and the companies. That's how I view it.
Well, actually, just perfect. So just before we start, how many here are from startups or founders in startups? It's got a relatively pretty good mix. Okay, yes, lights, action, thanks. Okay, that's good. And what about from government? Governments, and so corporates? A lot of corporates. What do the rest of you do, by the way? But I'm sure, agencies, companies, etc. Okay, so quite a lot from a corporate viewpoint, which is very interesting. So, Dirk, tell us how, with that audience in mind, what do you see Abu Dhabi doing from a health tech ecosystem, and how is the Singapore system going to be linked with you?
Yeah, first of all, we are really looking at Singapore. I mean, a lot has been achieved in this region already. I mean, for us it's important, and corporates play an important role to really link all the partners. I mean, as Abu Dhabi government, I'm representing the Department of Health, but it's the same for all the other government entities. We are in touch with all the corporates, and one of the things government can do is really to link the corporates to startups and to the ecosystem. That's the first step we're doing right now, really getting everybody engaged, universities, but also all the corporate partners. Doesn't really help if you bring in a lot of startups, but there's no corporate to receive them. So that's one of the tasks we have to do in Abu Dhabi.
Very good. Well, Russell, how do corporates work with startups? How do they work with you? Startups work with you.
So I think from a corporate perspective, the first thing, let me articulate a few basics before I get back to your question. So typically a large corporation would have some degree of capability in translating ideas to globally competitive products and services and solutions. So during this journey where companies think through this value chain, typically one of the outcomes is, besides doing everything internally, besides looking at acquisitions, besides looking at a consortium approach, obviously one of the modalities is to go partner with startups. And typically this is done maybe in 3-4 dimensions. One, you want to do technology foresighting right at the cutting edge and you're not sure how to play this game. Two, it could be a startup has a specific product technology or solutions technology that augment your broader offering insofar as your value proposition is concerned. Third, it could be an augmentation to the overall supply chain strategy within your company's business model. And there are a few other modalities. So typically, we have to be very clear which frame are we looking at insofar before we go discuss with a startup. So that's just a view of a corporation. And I think there are a few other options around those scenarios. Yeah.
Very good. Namal, tell us about Sri Lanka. Just what are you trying to achieve?
Thanks, Frank. I mean, Sri Lanka has gone through a rough patch for the last 40 to 50 years. If you look at, we have been having 2 civil uprisings, one in the south, one in the north. And the northern civil uprising ended up became one of the ruthless terrorist organizations in the world. However, in 2009, after defeating the terrorist organization, Sri Lanka was looking at a rapid infrastructure development based on maritime and aviation to use the geographical location of Sri Lanka. And we saw something around 5.8% of GDP growth, and our per capita income grew doubled within that period from 2009 to 2015. And if you look at our internet penetration is around 6.7 million out of 21 million population, so which is around 32% of our total population. And 90% of them are social media users. So mobile phone penetration is around 27 million, so which is far higher than the actual population. So which shows the expansion of technology in Sri Lanka. However, last few years, we have been going through a rough patch simply because of political instability and lack of consistency in policies. But despite all these challenges, we have seen few companies, as you correctly stated, who has done really well. Companies like Virtusa, who has already listed in the New York Stock Exchange, and companies like MIT, Millennium IT, who is later on bought by the London Stock Exchange, and startups like Arimac, who has got into robotics, and CodeGen, a new innovative company who has done well in the aviation industry and also revolutionizing the Sri Lankan automobile industry at the moment. So, which means with consistency of policies and willingness to transform from traditional mechanism to an innovative ecosystem, which is key for countries like Sri Lanka. So that's what we are looking at in the future, to build policies that can transform innovation, innovative ecosystems that can contribute to the GDP and to the world market.
Fantastic. Now, I have a question. How many of you are in the, I would say, creative industries? What would you call a creative industry? So you're all in tech. No, there's one over here. So do you realize that we had Martin Sorrell here yesterday, and Martin Sorrell said that we have, the creative industries is a $500 billion industry. There is $7 trillion worth of our business in the world, and 500 billion of that is from the creative industries. Now, whether you realize it or not, actually most of you will eventually be in the creative industries. Your platforms and everything will be powering involved with that. And when I say creative, I mean gaming, I mean esports, etc. And this is a very big passion of mine. So we're going to come to Serena here. I mean, because actually, while you have Facebook and Google out there, the ones that are needing the most talent are Apple Studios, Amazon Studios, Facebook Studios. And if you think about it, those are all tech companies who are in content. So, Serena, tell us about what you're looking to do in Malaysia.
So before I answer that question, I'm going to add one more thing to what we were talking about in terms of ecosystem. So we all know ingredients that go into the ecosystem, you know, the talent, regulators, entrepreneurs, et cetera, But one thing that we didn't touch upon, which I think is the secret sauce that connects everything, is the community itself. And so it's that intangible thing that is in the air. What's the philosophy of this community, this ecosystem? How do people operate? And so certainly in Malaysia, as we try and build our ecosystem, and MDAC has been in the business of building ecosystems for the last 23 years, that's something that we bear to mind. And for me, my wonderful discoveries as I took on this role was discovering what we have on a creative side. And when I say creative, to your point, I think of it as it's digital creative content. And when you think about where we're going in the future, there's technology and whatnot, but really the world demand now is for content. The world demand now is for entertainment. The world demand now is for, and everything is digital. So that's certainly one thing that we're building. And we're building that upon 23 years of track record. And so we now have a very mature ecosystem community of digital creative content producers in Malaysia that both produce our own IP as well as serve, you know, the production houses of the world, not just gaming production houses, but animation production houses and then FX production houses. So I'm very, very, very excited about that. As a data point that I'll share, because not many people know this, our digital creative content industry last year alone, close to $2 billion was what we produced. Very exciting. And we're just getting started.
It's huge. It's amazing. And as I was saying, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, those are tech companies. And they're spending billions on content. And they need the platforms to build that.
I would also add to that, coming back to content, when you think about new technology, you know, we all talk about AI, blockchain, whatever. One that I'm very excited about is VR. And so VR development, yes, the tech part keeps getting cheaper and cheaper, and the demand really is going to be the content that powers all of that. And when you think about it, that content builds upon skills in animation, gaming, creative, et cetera,
So for an ecosystem to thrive, we need the young people to become innovative and to think about it. Now, Singapore is very interesting because Singapore, when I was living in Singapore, Singapore was very conservative. It was in the end of the 90s. Everyone just went into banking and finance, and thanks to everyone, you guys here, you have changed that dramatically. People do think differently. How are you going to continue to encourage people to think differently, to go into startups, to go for corporates to start looking for innovative people, creative people, and how are you going to continue to do that? Lily, do you want to, because you're very involved in this area.
I've retired and I'm doing it in another country right now.
Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah.
But I think the community, as mentioned, is a very, very important aspect of it. Once the community is there and the ecosystem is sustainable, young people, working adults, professionals who have been retrenched is probably the wrong word, they have moved on, will find that this ecosystem is interesting for them. What is really important for us in Singapore is to equip our PMETs, professionals, managers, engineers, technicians, with the latest skills and skill sets. And they range from creative industry, digital, and more engineering upgraded skill sets. Once we keep upgrading and people realize that a job is not here forever, You go in there 5 years, 10 years, you acquire the experience, you acquire the skill sets, you move on to a better company. It could even be a small startup company. The sustainability of Singapore, I feel, is that the startups today, because I've seen them grow the last 13 years, they do need, sorry to say, the gray hairs to go in, to help them reorganize, to help them take it to the next stage. And this afternoon at 2:50, one of my former colleagues will be presenting very interesting data from a university institution, students who have gone through such programs. So giving him a plug so that you can, a shout out so you can go in and listen. Very, very important that the community churns itself. And in Singapore's case, I think we've already got the base, the buzz is there. We've got very supportive government and agencies. That is so key to this whole startup.
So how do corporates do this? Like, how are you going to get more innovative and participate in the ecosystem and get the right people in and do the right partnerships? That's for both of you guys, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yes, I think whatever you do in life, the biggest challenge is to change minds. I mean, you can change everything, but changing minds is something, and there's probably not one recipe you can use everywhere. What we try to do is, first of all, be open to the world, bring everybody in. I mean, you need people from outside in order to fuel the ecosystem. The other thing, what we do as government is trying to provide everything those people need, starting from funding, innovation-friendly regulation is quite important. The other thing, our country is very much looking at the leadership. So government starts a digital strategy, which also helps to bring people in, since government becomes a corporate. So it might be easier to attract people. But still, I mean, it takes a lot of time. And I think it's probably like Singapore in the 19th, invest in real estate, invest in trade, in something, but don't invest in technology. So it needs a lot of support from the government, also trusting the government that the technology is something you should invest in. But I think there are different levers you have to use, but not really one you can use all over the world.
So maybe I should also add on this community point from a corporation perspective, and also from a Silicon Valley perspective. I spent 2.5 decades in a Silicon Valley type company. I think there are a couple of illustrative traits there I thought Singapore could do a bit more with. And over the years, obviously, we are trending the right direction. So one is talent diversity. I think if you are in Silicon Valley, you will realize that the diversity is at its peak, the talent concentration is at its peak, and if you create a kind of environment that allows diversity and peak talent to come together, I think that's one of the secret sauce of a thriving ecosystem. But coming back to Singapore, I think spending many years here, working here, I believe the mindset has shifted. In the past, the younger folks would go join an MNC and have a very stable career or join the government. Today, in my interactions with the startup community here, you can see a lot of young people quite comfortable making their first career move in a startup. Going to a startup also means taking a lot of risks, and things may not pan out. I think partly because the government has put a lot of investment to create a conducive environment. Society is more wealthy, so a lot of young kids come with some degree of safety net in that regards. I think there's one other element we still need to work on. I think corporations here haven't gotten around to hiring people from startups who have failed. In my previous life, I spent 20 over years, having colleagues turn ex-colleagues going into a startup for 2-3 years. After 1-2 pivots, they don't make it, they come back.
Which is, but Silicon Valley, you do it all
That's
the time.
exactly what I was used to in my previous life.
Yep.
People who went out there, tried,
Yep.
failed fast, after 1-2 pivots, come back. We view it, at least in my previous career history, it was a very positive experience. I would never take it as a negative, just that you went off to a startup that didn't succeed. So I think this part on the corporation front, we are trending there in Singapore, but I don't think this is entrenched as a mindset.
Lily?
Yeah. So just a quick comment. Innovation ecosystems need not be just about the geek community. it can be about food, it can be about precision engineering, it can be about a lot of things. Need not just be about the geek community. So I think we need to rethink. And then the other one is institutions and management mindset. Those who are on a higher levels need to broaden their thinking, let things be. It shouldn't be a pyramid structure anymore in terms of reporting.
It's an important point to note that, because most of the time when people think about innovation, they automatically default to tech. But what is innovation at the end of the day? It's change that creates value.
Yep.
And so if you always come back to that, that's the kind of mindset that we have to cultivate.
It's a mindset.
It's a mindset thing.
Yeah, in Sri Lanka, we tried this ecosystem based on entrepreneurship, which would have led to an innovative ecosystem in the long run called Divinaguma, based on collecting entrepreneurs around the country.
Get the mindset change.
Yeah, and the governmental and rural development based on rural urbanization. So we believe that without rural urbanization and entrepreneurship, it is very difficult to build an innovative ecosystem that will lead. So as a result, in the long run, later on, we managed to build an ecosystem based on innovation called Trace City, so which has now started picking up in Sri Lanka.
Excellent. So, sorry, Dirk, yeah.
Yes, one thing, just experience from the UAE. One more important thing to also to change in investment philosophy, have an opportunity for exits. I mean, there were two big deals that really
This was the next
changed
big thing I wanted to talk
investment philosophy in the UAE. It was Careem acquired by Uber and Souk acquired by Amazon last year. Both of them, you really feel that investors come in, the whole thing changed. They realize, yes, if I do something today, in 5 years, I might sell to some of the really big guys.
Exactly. So this is for all of you, right? Because this is the secret of Silicon Valley. The secret of Silicon Valley is that Facebook, Google, Amazon, etc., all the very big corporates, Verizon, GE, are always buying startups. And yet, in all our markets here, the corporates very rarely do. And if they do, they think overseas companies are better than local companies for some reason. And so how do we get corporates, while the local talent is fantastic, they think, oh, we buy same company in Silicon Valley for 500 million because we don't want to spend the money on we don't think the Singapore one is good enough. Sometimes that mentality is there with the corporates. So how do we get exits happening in the local markets? How do we get the big companies, the big corporates getting involved and buying and developing and buying talent? Because we need to see the exits.
I would say it starts with conversation. Like if I reflect back on my own corporate journey in that organization that I was part of, you know, before it was always like it was part of two worlds. You say it's us, and then that's the world outside. And corporates thought they were invincible. But I think the world's proved corporates wrong in general. So now there's a whole movement around corporate innovation in general, and those conversations are happening. Some of the champions are doing it better than others. But as a general trend, you start to see innovation labs everywhere. And I'm not saying innovation labs is the end-all, be-all answer, but that's the conversation. That's how it starts.
Yep.
I'm actually very encouraged by what I'm seeing in my own ecosystem, where the top of the house now. So now that there's action outside, like everybody recognizes the movement. Now leaders, the top of the house now themselves. I get called from CEOs saying, oh, we want to do blah, 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 blah. How do we do it? Let's collaborate. And so once you actually get them thinking about innovation to drive innovation faster, it's the startups are, it's like the pool of innovation that you can help to tap. But what's happening right now, as a general matter, corporates are building that innovation capabilities, and most of the time they're actually acquiring to actually help foster that mindset in their organizations.
So one of the things too I feel for corporations, when you buy a startup, there is a cultural shift. And if the corporation's managers cannot accept it, it's not going to work.
I know,
so
but
the mindset has to change in the corporations.
But it's what catalyzes the change.
Yeah.
Because if they didn't do that, if they don't see, oh, there's a group of other people like that in our building that are different, and they don't start getting curious, then it would always be the same.
Is hard.
The integration is very hard. Even Sorry.
Sorry, so maybe let me chime in at this stage. I think there are a couple of push-pull factors that has led to this hypothesis of why Singapore startups don't see that many exit.
Yeah.
I think one, we're in the early innings of this startup journey. I think today it looks like it's thriving, but if you rewind the clock 3 years back, we were just started on this journey. So I think that's one scenario. In the US, large corporations, when they make acquisitions, you can almost make a case they're trying to stamp out potential disruptive competition. So that is also one motivation, which I don't think the Singapore corporates think along those lines. I've gone through 1 or 2 acquisitions of startups in my previous life. It's certainly doable, but it's predicated on the company having a very clear strategy insofar as what is their product, what's their service, what's their solution strategy. If there's a very clear fit and the founder is willing to exit, I've seen cases acquisition. So in Singapore's case, time, more and more of our corporations have a more sophisticated product development strategy, service strategy, founders willing to exit. I generally sense founders in Singapore tend to hang on to their investments. In the Silicon Valley, day one, they're thinking about exit. So you add all these 3 together, I think you can see where we are today. Yeah. But it will change over time.
Yeah, and I think it's a perception we build as a country and as an ecosystem itself to attract more bigger companies to come in. For example, Estonia, with 1.2 million population, they have done tremendously well when it comes to e-governance and establishing startups. And even if you look at India with 1.5 billion population, they have more than 8 unicorns in last year out of 300 startups. So it's all depend on the perception you build and how well you establish your policies and how attractive you are. Sri Lanka has many talent who works abroad, but if Sri Lanka can build up the infrastructure, cut down the cost, and build that perception that it's a country where you can come and do your investments and buy your startups, it is that perception you build which matters, and consistency in policies. Policies has to be consistency so that people can come and buy into it, because the manufacturing and invention world is too busy with looking at the bigger countries and all their trade partners or trade wars that are going on at the moment. But this is what we believe the countries like Sri Lanka, even Singapore, even Malaysia, even Maldives or Bangladesh or Bhutan, it doesn't matter the size of this country or the scale of the country. It matters what you offer and what you put on table and what policies you put on table. So this is what we believe, that these countries should work together to build up our perception, that we are equally good enough, or we are equally capable enough to deliver what is being expected in the rest of the world.
So Serena, thank you very much. So coming to, what's your year, I think, you've been in the
Coming up to 6 months.
So coming to 6 months. So what's your strategy for building out this ecosystem? Because when you're thinking about building out, what is the strategy for building out an ecosystem? You've got events coming up in August and September. How are you going to?
So first thing is just amplifying what we have, because I believe in building on strength, and so identifying what we're good at already. For example, creative is one of them, and continuing to cultivate that community and finding ways to scale that, like driving impact at scale. So we're really focused on that, and driving engagement is key. So now we're at the phase where we're not just building the community itself, but we have to make sure that the outside community understands that too. So we have a huge digital engagement agenda, making sure that the rest of our 32.6 million people really get it, and we can drive adoption, and we're trying to do that at scale. So that's one part of it. The other part that we're doing also is to continue to similar themes that we heard this morning with Dr. Janil. It's driving the national agenda. So at MDEC right now, we have the pen on several different policies and strategy papers to make sure that we're all aligned in terms of moving the digital economy forward.
So Serena, you need to come to Penang, where I'm now based. And
we were just there. We had a team in Penang on Monday, actually, with the Chief Minister. Yes, and I was just there 2 weeks ago. And so that's the other thing we're trying to do, because it's really important that I'm trying to amplify and make sure that everybody's connected, because we've built our community already in Cyberjaya, but the entire Malaysia is the community. And so we have really strong partnerships and discussions all the time with Penang and Selangor. I mean, it's starting, you know? So I've only been here for 6 months, but that's the plan. The plan is to make sure that we're all one big community. Because coming from the US, you know, we tend to think of New York, Boston, DC, like that's almost like one thing. It's not very, very different. And so in Malaysia, we're all very close together. Singapore, Malaysia, and Penang. And then you go further up, that's Bangkok already. And so we're building like the whole community.
Perfect. So in SparksLabs, we now have 240 companies across Asia, but 140 of those are in Korea. Now, we went into Korea 6 years ago. It was very interesting. Korean, one, the investors were like pretty old school. They're always asking for like personal guarantees and crap like that. Well, that just went out the door. And because once SoftBank and others started investing into Korea, all those Korean investors went gone. And then the second thing with the corporates, again coming back to the big corporates, but once the US companies started buying and investing into Korean companies, it woke up the local corporates. So coming to that second point, it always is, when we get this, you know, the ones who've got the experience and everything coming in and starting to do things. So how are you guys going to attract the Facebooks, the Googles, the Amazons, etc.? Maybe not Amazon, but some of the others, but to, because they just own everything, but to come in and challenge the ecosystem and develop out the ecosystem. So, Annie, do you want to?
So one way is to make sure that we're easy to do business with. And from that standpoint, from a government standpoint, like we have the philosophy of, as we're trying to build, it's always partnerships. And we've started to use the language of, it's not public-private partnerships, it's private-public partnerships, because we really do believe that it's a collaborative model is the way to go. So what we are on the journey of is to make sure that we are a government that's friendly in terms of not stifling innovation. And so these conversations are what we want to lead with. One of the things that we've launched, and this is new and we're still iterating through it, we've launched in Malaysia the Malaysian Policy Innovation Council. And so which is meant to be a one-stop shop place where industry and government can just start the converse, bring ideas and highlight things that are not working, and how do you actually put solution teams against that to actually go solve it, like which acts do we really need to change and facilitate those discussions. And so one, you know, we're highlighting that we're very open to conversing and very ready to engage, sort of. We're learning through it as well.
But it's an ecosystem you guys can come down and participate.
That's right.
So coming to Sri Lanka, how do I, you know, they'll be like, oh, Sri Lanka's nice beaches, etc. But like, no, actually there's so much more. How do you persuade them on
Well,
that?
since Sri Lanka has a lot of talent, a lot of talent in the technology, in technological innovation industry. So what we're looking at is to do the policies right and make it more easier to come and get into startups and make it open. And at the same time, looking at cutting down the cost and develop the infrastructure, because what we find is now the cost is rising all over the world. So this is something that we need to address and build policies that can sustain ecosystem on innovation and startups.
Have you got any big companies to come down and start, any of the global companies to start thinking about Sri Lanka?
Yeah, there are many companies who are looking at investing in Sri Lanka and buying into Sri Lankan startups. And the best one of the best example is MIT, who is bought by the London Stock Exchange, and Virtusa, who is listed in the New York Stock Exchange, and companies like Arimac has got into robotics at the moment. And CodeGen is looking at revolutionizing the Sri Lankan automobile market. You know, these are things that Sri Lanka was never spoken. But Sri Lankans were involved all over the world, helping other countries to develop their.
So you want to get the diaspora coming back, because that was something in Korea. I mean, Korea and Singapore, and a lot of that has been getting the diaspora back, right? Getting them back, which is how are you? I mean, in Abu Dhabi, like there are lots of talented people all over the world. I mean, how do you get them to come to Abu Dhabi and be part of the ecosystem?
The first thing is of coming and also retaining them for a longer time. But I mean, it's nice to talk about a local ecosystem. At the same time, competition is international from day one. I mean, so what we aim at is starting with really international partners, big ones like Mubadala, our local fund, government fund, Microsoft SoftBank. This is a structure called Hub 71 that we recently launched. working with Plug and Play and others, really creating trust all over the world that the big names are in Abu Dhabi, and I think this helps to bring in others as well.
And of course, it's not just about expats like us.
No,
it's
of course.
How do we get the locals?
I mean,
how do we get everybody locally trained?
As a government,
hire them? Yep.
as a government, we don't look at acceleration only, but we start with education, innovators of tomorrow. I mean, this is community. It takes some time, of course, early stages in order to incubation and then acceleration. And of course, I mean, it's a challenge. Very many of the local talents are in some way safe government jobs. They're not really keen on taking risk. So I think the first step is really to bring in people who only have one option, and this is to be successful in Abu Dhabi, and then I think the rest will follow. But again, changing minds is a challenge.
To get them through. So Russell, now, you're out there doing M&A all around the world, Europe, US. How do you persuade great companies in the US to get bought by ST Engineering in Singapore?
Oh, I can't reveal the secret sauce because it's M&A work. But anyway, coming back, I mean, I'll answer in a slightly different way. So for ST Engineering, we, like many large corporations, have a corporate venture arm. The corporate venture arm obviously has a very clear, specific strategic areas of focus. And we've just started on this journey. We have done, I think, 5 investments, and it's very global in nature, I believe. 2 in Israel, 1 in Singapore, 2 in US. Then we have another earlier stage accelerator, open engineering lab, where we house pre-Series A early stage startups from Singapore, some coming from SG Innovate, some coming from NUS. So we participate in the entire continuum of the startup. Obviously, back to fitting it to strategic business areas, and specifically, functionally, what do we want? Is it a product augmentation? Is it a supply chain augmentation? Is it technology foresighting? And we are not adverse to acquisition down the road in the future. So I think coming back to this point, I think large corporations have a critical role in building a innovative ecosystem at every jurisdiction. It's more than accelerators and startups. It's how the large corporations fund and participate and enable this either through exits or through in-house modality that somebody's big comes to them.
Hand up instead of just going for it. Just go for it.
I'm just being polite. Okay, I think to sustain the innovative ecosystem, we have to think about the future of education. Like it or not, we can't be teaching in the same way that we've been teaching and educating young and professionals. So I think that really is one thing to sustain in next 10 years. What is the future of education? How are educational materials going to be disseminated? Should it be done the same way? I think that's something we all need to think, and that will change the mindsets.
And I would add to that, as it relates to the future of education, closer connection between academia and the private and the industry.
Yeah.
I think that in the past we've always had, it's separate, but that has to be closer together, because the reality of it is that no one's figured out the future, right?
Yep.
And so the only way for you to actually be more future savvy is to actually collaborate so that you can solve problems together, and closer connection with academia and industry is one way to do it.
Let me add a small thing. What we have, policy paper we are working on in Sri Lanka called Fit Sri Lanka. So what we are looking at is live, study, work, and play. So we want to build an ecosystem around live, study, work, and play. So we will encourage the next generation to get into building up innovative ecosystems that can not only contribute to just one sector, but to the entire economy in Sri Lanka.
We're going to have a study group because I'm going to copy his stuff.
But education is it, right? I mean, because you've got to persuade them that, Singapore puts in so much money into education, which is...
We're still not there yet. We need to, we're changing, right? No tests, we're changing. It needs to be experience-based, project-based.
Yeah.
There's some new university models coming out now where you're not in a brick-and-mortar university, you spend 3 months in a country, you have projects in that country, and from there, you learn the basics of what is chemistry, what is mathematics.
Because things are going to change so much. I mean, the days where you just went head down, maths, I get into Oxford or whatever, I become a quant, I go into the city, that's gone because AI is going to do that job so much faster. So how do you get people in your ecosystems, the younger people and the older people, in fact everybody, thinking more creatively? Because we need creative people to take advantage of all the data coming in and doing things with it.
So I want to add on to Lily's comment because I'm on the same page with her. I think the whole business of education is evolving, like Lily said. We are gone past this era where you spend your first quarter of your life, like you just said, mugging, studying, formal education, then off you go into a career that almost defaults to a repetitive kind of career where you don't need to learn so much, to an environment where you learn throughout your entire work span, so to speak. And I think Singapore is making this pivot as fast as we can. We have set up a national institution to enable lifelong learning and driving it across various modalities. If you ask the universities today, in Singapore at least, they have 3 very clear objectives. The original objective, educating the young. Number 2, educating the adult in the workforce. Number 3, how do you, back to Serena's point, how do you partner with industries and the universities to create the tighter linkages so that the universities' teaching modality and the subject matter expert remains very relevant and fresh, given how fast things are changing, be it in the creative industry, be it in the technology space. So laying the foundation for a lifelong education that is fresh, relevant for the industry in an era of disruption is absolutely critical. And I think that in itself drives creativity.
That's it. I mean, Namal, are you involved in that as well?
Yeah, we are looking at getting into the crowdsourcing, because what we believe is we need to get the people back to thinking level. Because what has happened today is with all the technology that is created by us, what we talk today, has stopped people, actually the younger generation, from thinking on their own, stop being innovative. So that's why we are looking at a crowdsourcing policy. So we go to the people, get them to think, give their ideas as to what they expect from the policies that should be done and what sort of background they want to be developed for them to come forward in life. So that's why in Sri Lanka, what we, the policy paper we are working on, so we are looking at crowdsourcing, getting into the youth, getting to them and see what they want. And at the same time, educate them, as she correctly stated, about the modern systems, the educational changes that has to be brought in, the subjects that has to be taught, that kind of policy framework that we are looking at in the future.
How do you get talented people in Malaysia? What's the path?
So one of the things, to build on what you just said, in Malaysia, we've tried this. We announced last week our premier digital university and polytechnic program. And so what is this program? It's basically recognizing these 16 universities that we have to start with, to say, okay, this is how you run a good tech program, which would include strategic partnerships with industry and all the corresponding programming that you want your entire experience. And so going to get a tech education or innovation education at one of these 16 premier universities means that you're getting exposure beyond just academics, because there's career counseling, there's events, there's everything along the line with that. So that's one way, one of the things that we're doing in that regard. We're starting with this first 16, and then we'll see how that goes.
So I think we're out, guys. We could talk for forever, but thank you very much. Thanks everyone for participating and being part of this today.
Come visit Malaysia.
Come visit Malaysia.
Visit
We have
Malaysia.
Malaysia. We have Sri Lanka. We have Abu Dhabi.
Maybe Abu Dhabi.
Absolutely. From a health perspective. And of course,
Singapore.
Singapore.
Singapore as well. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you very much.
For your panel.
Seal.